chainsaws that are in use, the chippers, stump grinders, things are they're very loud. So we protect our ears.
Now, when I think about that, do you guys have to work with codes or signs? In other words, certain signs mean this and that and the other? Because if you can't hear very good, and the guy's down there saying, to the left, to the left.
Yeah, a tree climber will always be in contact with his groundsman visually as well as verbally. So there are hand signals that we use, but there's no standard
manual
for
on
that.
it. No.
Right, but it is very critical that they understand.
Oh yeah, if there's a telephone wire going through there, and you don't find. Oh yeah.
Yeah, and that's part of the pre-inspection. In entering any tree, we like to know what hazards are there.
Do you ever have to call the telephone company or the power company on a job?
Yes, we do.
Where there's could be a difficulty?
Yes, the utility lines actually own the space or they own the right to the space that they occupy. So if our work will be within 10 feet of those aerial lines, then we must notify them of our presence. And then it's up to them whether they want to supervise our work or do the work themselves.
Yeah.
And that usually depends on the voltage in the line. So yes, to answer the question, we're very often in contact with utility companies because of their presence in the tree, and that's underground as well.
Unfortunately, sometimes for the power lines going through, they can really brutalize a tree. But I guess there's no other choice. Sometimes you just have to do that.
Well, actually, and I'm glad you brought it up because there's
choice?
Yes. Now there's not a choice. You know, the utility company is not going to permit the tree to be within that 10-foot area of their line. However, there are good and not so good ways to prune a tree away from that space. And a utility company is not so much concerned with the arboreal correctness of the pruning practice that's done to clear that line.
They're trying to get their job done. Yeah.
So we get called quite often to preserve the health and integrity of a more heritage tree that may be encroaching that line. In other words, we'll make heading cuts to prevent future growth into that line that's going to require more and more and more pruning and more eventual water sprout growth.
Well, the reason I ask that is over on our street on Ravensworth Road, the power company come down through there, but this one person said, I insist to having my arborist here to do this trimming because I don't want it butchered. And they let him do it.
We've been on sites for just that kind of work.
You know, just because
what happens then is you end up with a tree that's a little bit more correctly pruned. And I'm not saying that it's the best thing for the tree all the time.
No.
It's not a bit, but most of urban and suburban life is not the best situation for a tree. And there's plenty of other things that I could bring up but we're trying to mitigate that in small ways and still live in an urban and suburban environment and protect the health and integrity of these trees.
You got a saw like mine, I think.
Yeah,
is that the pull cut?
This is what. This is a Silky Zubat, and that's typically what our climbing arborists. It's very sharp.
Oh yeah.
It's razor sharp. We'll take into the tree instead of a chainsaw. If we're doing pruning, I prefer to see my arborists making their cuts with that because it's more surgical. It's
this, folks, by the way, if you notice which way the teeth are, on a carpenter saw, it's a push cut, but on a pruning saw, it's a pull cut, because it's easier to pull down than it is to push up.
Right.
It's on a pull cut.
And it is very, very sharp.
Dude will cut.
And we, our climbers and arborists clean them daily because, obviously it's a surgical tool, so we like to keep it clean and free of any disease.
Well, now, when I tell my viewing audience about pruning, and I once in a while have a little bit about pruning, let's say you have a branch about a little bigger than my arm, folks. But if you cut a branch off like that, I tell them to make one cut here, another cut here, and then when that piece falls off, then I cut up here, right?
And the reason physically that you're doing that is because if you just made your cut here, what's going to happen is the bark on the bottom
down like a
is going
banana.
to peel, and then you're going to have a big wound in the stem that then would take years and probably not actually ever heal well from.
Yeah.
So this first cut that you referred to is what we call a relief cut. The second cut, and now actually ANSI is changing the standards, instead of making the cut directly back, what was happening to climbers when that cut was back a couple inches behind the relief cut,
Yeah.
sometimes it would actually, when the limb breaks finally,
Yeah.
it would take the saw with
Oh, yeah.
with the limb. So ANSI has determined that the safer way to do that would be to cut directly above the relief cut.
Directly above it, yeah.
Yes.
Now,
So
you
that's what
mentioned
we're
something
doing now.
before the show started about the collar on a large tree and to make a proper cut.
Yes.
Cut right above, right in front of the collar, right? Like my
Right.
collar
And we
here?
call it a collar cut because we don't want to ever interfere with the parent stem bark when we're making any